Good afternoon, everyone. This is Queenie Clem with Queenie's Book Talk and Reviews, and I am your literary ambassador. And today on my channel, I have Anagia Wright. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Glad to be here, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Now tell us a little about yourself.
So my general spiel is I am a techie by trade, but I am a writer by necessity. So I do have a regular day job, but I write because I have to, because I have the voices in my head and I must bow to their whims if I want to maintain my sanity. I actually write a lot of different types of fiction. I don't do nonfiction, but I do science fiction and fantasy. And then I write urban dramas, urban thrillers, and urban suspense.
Okay. Do you think you will write under any other genres such as women's fiction, Christian fiction, historical fiction?
Um, I haven't really explored any of those. Women's fiction, quite possibly. Some of my writing could actually fall under um, women's or contemporary
Mhm,
fiction.
mhm.
I do kind of like history. That is something I'm interested in. And a lot of times I do sprinkle that into my writing, but those specific genres themselves have their own rules, and there's not necessarily a desire for me to do that level of research. And I'm one of those people who write what I know, and
Mhm.
so that's kind of how I ended up where I am. And I think that's the path that I'm continuing down. Things that I'm familiar
Mhm.
with, things that I'm interested in, and while I like the history aspect, the whole having to place everything in a specific period and being true to those things is something that I'm a little less interested in.
Mhm. How did you get into the genre?
Well, so I got suckered into writing in general. While I've always kind of written, I started out writing song lyrics. I worked in the music industry way too many years. And the more I read, the more I started to kind of get the idea that, hey, I could probably do this myself. And the
Mhm.
next thing I know, my characters kind of started up, and it's kind of history from there.
Okay. Where do you get your characters from?
Okay, I'm going to admit this. I know we're not supposed to admit these type of things, but some of it is yourself. When I write, I can see some of myself in my characters.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
am very much a people watcher, so I'll. It may not necessarily be directly someone I know, but there'll be bits and pieces that I understand from people who I've either seen out in public, people who I may work with, people who I may have trained in one of my courses. So kind of a mishmash of people who I've observed in some time period in my life.
Okay, let's talk about and show them and tell us about those.
All right. So the most recent one would be this one, The Agency, Revival and Resurrection. It is actually the follow up, it was the reader requested follow up of my book, Love and Deja. So the agency actually follows the son's story. It
Mhm.
is about, it does have the father's aspect as far as his previous dealings with an organization called the agency. And his father, Grammarius Gertrude, the oldest
Mhm.
of my group, used to be a terminator. So he used to assassinate people for a living. And so now his son is on the cusp of being 18, and this is the story of kind of how he's getting sucked into that world that his father has tried his best to exit out of.
Oh, wow.
Have to, give him a little bit of espionage, a little bit of,
Mhm. Mhm.
drama, but there's some love story going on in there as well.
Okay.
And then the book before that would be this one, Love and Deja.
Mhm.
And this was actually how the mother and father got together. So Deja was the main female character. She was actually stood up at the altar. Well, not stood up, but her fiance at the time waited till he got to the altar to profess his undying love for her best friend. And it is about her redemption, Deja's redemption, and how she
Mhm.
was able to find love again, dealing with many aspects in her life, things that, like, her mother always said, she was too dark, she was too fat, no one would ever want her, and how she actually met somebody who helped her rebuild her self-esteem, and that she loved her for who she was.
Okay. How long have you been in the literary business?
Writing professionally since I guess 2000.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah.
how do you feel about reviews?
Um, of course, there's a love-hate relationship with that. I typically don't necessarily read reviews. I'm one of those kind of people, and especially even because I know that everything is subjective. So what may be for one person may not be for another. And I kind of feel like, from my perspective, that while reviews can be beneficial as far as helping someone grow, uh, reviews for me are really for other readers to kind of get a feel for whether it's something they're like or not. Versus
Mhm.
me as a writer, I write because I have to. So while improving on the craft is one aspect, I write the books that I want to read, and my characters give me the books that they want me to, the stories that they want to tell.
Mhm.
I have to follow their rules.
Mhm.
Again, I've learned this over the years that do as you're told, and you'll be fine. Um, you know, I do go through the regular editing process. There are things that need to be changed. Things don't
Mhm.
make sense. Those types of things. But as far as the actual reviews themselves, personally, I don't read them. I don't read movie reviews because I've discovered that most of the things that people um, don't enjoy or have a hard time understanding are things that I love about the way stories are told.
Mhm. Has your impact your faith by any chance?
No, I am Wiccan and a practicing witch, so that's kind of where I am. I fully acknowledge that's where I am in life. My family is. I have a lot of Native American in my family, and those were things that were a lot of them were passed down to me. So I haven't necessarily always viewed the world through the eyes of a Christian person, and so in a sense, I think for the science fiction and the fantasy things, again, it comes back to writing what I know and those things that I experienced. There have been things that have happened in my life that are actually kind of reflective in a lot of these books. There's always that story behind the story.
Mhm.
Um, so being able to articulate these things in a way that helps me get them out, but also allows me to be true to myself is kind of what has led me and continued to be what is reflective in my work.
Okay. What plans do you have for 2020?
So I have 3 or 4 books that I have been holding on to forever. It's one of those things as a writer, I know I needed to put them aside, but these have been put aside for way too long. So I actually do have at least 2 books, maybe 3, scheduled for release in 2020. 2 of them will be fantasy books, and one will be yet another, probably an urban suspense book. So I'm actively working on those, going through the editing process. One of them I do have to finish, and then plan those out. So that's kind of what my arc is for 2020.
Okay. When did you know you wanted to become an author?
I don't know that I ever wanted to become an author. Again, I got suckered into that. I have always been a writer, but one of my roommates at a time happened to send my stuff off to somebody, and she kind of worked it and acted as an agent in that role. So I got suckered into the business side of this. So I always tell people, at heart, I'm a writer. I don't know that I'll necessarily always be an author. For me, those 2 things are mutually exclusive. So I'll always write, but I may not necessarily always do the business stuff.
Okay. What inspires you to write?
Reading. So I do realize that the more I read, the more I write. Um, just observing the world around me gets my characters going. Exercise. So I know that as I start to that moving meditation type
Mhm.
of place, that the people in my head will start to talk, and next thing I know, I'll be telling somebody's story.
What are you currently reading now?
I am on. I'm actually in between a couple of books. So I'm doing more of the science fiction and fantasy stuff right now. I'm in the middle of Kelly Armstrong's Canesville series and Dorinda Jones's Charlie Davidson series. It was funny because I'm on the last few pages of uh, it's the eighth book in the Kelly Armstrong, I mean, in the Dorinda Jones series, and I refuse to read the last few pages until I receive book 9 and 10. So I got books 9 and 10 a couple of days ago. So I know I'll go ahead and finish those and continue those series out to the end.
What has been the hardest thing about writing a book?
Maintaining my sanity. So because my characters are extremely demanding and they are very clear on how things should be and where things should be, um, I do suffer from depression. It's just kind of part of my life. It's nothing I've ever been ashamed of or afraid to discuss. But I know that those two things are tied together. So um, the whole challenge of still wanting to be able to write and being able to write, but balancing that with the mental health aspect. When I know that when I'm on my medication, there will be no writing. There's kind of, those two things are tied together. So when you address one in that way, it does have a significant effect on the other. So I think the greatest challenge has been trying to balance that. And, I'm not one of those people who, if I'm not on my medication, that I'm a threat to myself or to anyone else. And so I've been able to work with therapists and fortunate enough to have psychiatrists and psychologists who believe in using other means to address those types of issues. And so using, herbal remedies,
Mm-hmm.
food, um, exercise, those types of things have allowed me to be able to balance those. But it has been a journey to get there. And I'm in a place where now I feel like those two things are going hand in hand, and we're kind of all on the same road, and we all have this same understanding. And, it allows me to still be able to write.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for being so transparent about that because just not even 30 minutes ago, I interviewed an author and that's what she was talking about, having mental illness. And
Mhm.
a lot of us of color do not like to talk about it. We don't go no therapy. We don't do any of that. So
Mhm.
thank you for doing that. Thank you
Oh,
for
you're welcome.
out
You're
because she
welcome.
did also. Thank when you're not writing, what are you doing?
um, Okay, so I'm a playing in the dirt again, girl. I am definitely not a girly girl, so you would definitely find me outside playing in the dirt. I'm a racer, so I do, go to the drag strip. We go to drifting events and that sort of thing. I do like movies, and I love to bake. I'm a liquor cake maker. So if I'm not writing, you might find me working on a liquor cake.
Really?
Yes.
My brother does that too. All right. Where did your love of books, reading, and writing come from?
Oh, definitely my mother. My mother was an English teacher, but we've had books all of our lives. Me and my sister, we've always kind of been surrounded by books, not just necessarily from the English perspective, but my sister loved comic books too. So she and I are 7 years apart. So anything that she had kind of got passed down to me. And while I got a little bit out of the comic book side, I definitely stayed into any kind of books, anything I can get my hands on that I can read.
Mhm. What is the best way to market your books?
I don't know that there's an answer to that because everything keeps changing, and every 5 minutes you feel like you have a formula and you have things that are working, and then things go into left field. So I would think in general, really, it's about meeting with people and
Mhm.
connecting with people on a people level. You know, for me, even the purpose of my books, it really was about touching one person's life. If my books could touch the life of one person, then for me, I feel like I've been successful. And that's really what I'm out here doing. Most of my stories there's always, again, the story behind the story. So while there's this playful aspect and this lightheartedness that can be there, there are always serious issues to be addressed. And so you want to, well, my desire is to address those in a way that isn't preachy, it isn't, all in your face, but it makes you kind of step back and think, hey, some people do go through this. And I always assumed, based on my past experience or what the media has told me, that things were, a certain way. And then, reading this story, you've gotten now a different perspective, and it makes you think, hey, maybe what I thought this wasn't really what it was.
Mhm. How has publishing your first book changed your process of writing?
I don't know that it's changed my process of writing. So I started out being a traditional, like I said, I looked up, and a traditional publisher picked up my first couple of books. I think now I am more in a place where, again, I write what I want to write. It's not necessarily about the money per se. I mean, the money's nice. I'm not going to negate that aspect of it, but that's not my primary goal. And I think initially the money was the primary goal. I mean, you're required to make your advance, you're
Mhm.
required to make that money back and those sort of things. So the drive was really about the money. And now the drive is about the stories.
Mhm. Okay. How do you balance the demands of writing with other responsibilities?
I'm well aware that I write in cycles. So I definitely plan out my time in order to be able to do that. I know that come July, August, my characters will really ramp up. They'll really start to talk to me. And so that starting at that time through the end of the year, that really is my time to write. I spend the beginning part, January through June, more so of the business aspect. So even if I'm preparing for the things that I'll need to market or push, what have you, at the later part of the year, it really is more business oriented, so that when I get into that writing cycle, I can kind of put those other things on autopilot, schedule things to post as need be, and then I can actually focus on the writing.
What attracts you to the genre that you're in?
Stumbling upon stuff. It would be a cover that kind of attracts my attention. And the
Mhm.
next thing I know, I'm starting to read that. And then as I read those things, my mind starts to churn like, hey, I could do a story like that. And that leads me down the path of writing that.
What do you consider to be your best accomplishment so far in the writing industry?
um, I think in that one, it really is about the bringing to the forefront uh, some misconceptions that a lot of people had about, especially teen suicide, which is what my first book was about, but also about assumptions. In my book, Double Take, it's about a brother who has assumed something, and so it kind of split their family. And as the book progresses, I met with a book club, and it was really interesting because one of the members of the club could actually really relate, and she actually felt sorry for this trifling brother. So it's a matter of, again, changing perspective. Even for me, I
Mhm.
had never really thought to have compassion for him. I mean, on a high level, I get it. This is what happens when you assume, and we all know what happens when you assume.
Mhm.
But the fact that I was able to have somebody to actually have that other perspective and to feel sorry for a character who, in theory, you should have just been mad about the whole
Mhm.
time, and it should have
Mhm.
been you get what you get, and that's what you get type situation.
Okay. Now, what projects are you working on right now?
Okay, so I am doing the edits for my smut book. I say it is what it is. A Licentious Storm. It is a standalone book. It's one of my vampire books. I am working on the edits for two others. One of them is Carolina Drift, which is a urban thriller, and it is a race driver story. And then Toe in Love. which is my tow truck girl story. I tend to have female characters who do these unconventional or typically male oriented jobs. And so that's kind of that's what I'm working on right now.
Okay. Who would you like to collab with if you could collab with someone to write a book?
Probably, well, okay. So right now on the paranormal science fiction fantasy side, definitely Phoenix Williams. I've seen a lot of her work, and I really like what she's doing as far as being able to mix the two genres, the urban stuff she does, the erotic kind of stuff she does, along with the fantasy aspect. So definitely Phoenix would be at the top of my list.
How can readers get in touch with you?
The best place to start is my website, which is www.anagiawright. That's www.anagiawright.com. There are links on there to my Facebook, on Twitter and Instagram. I am at @anagiawright.
Okay. Is there anything else you would like to add before we close?
Definitely. Thank you for having me. I also wanted to encourage people, try something new. A lot of us get into a rut of doing the same old, same old. We're in 2020 now. This is definitely a time to explore a new genre, whether you're writing or reading it. Get out there and just try something new. You'll never know what you're capable of doing until you actually go out and try to do something.
All right. Well, thank you, Anna G.
You're welcome.
And today on my blog, and I really appreciate it. I'm lost for words right now.
Welcome to 2020.
Thank you so much. And again, this is Queenie Clem with Queenie's Book Talk and Reviews. Happy reading. Bye, y'all.
Bye.